Lily Spencer was on her hands and knees in Ethan Carson's stable when she heard his boots stop behind her. She didn't look up. She never did anymore. She kept scrubbing her cracked hands working the stone floor while the July heat pressed down on the barn like a punishment from God. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. She wrung out the rag. "Yes, sir," she answered. "I do." That was the beginning. Not of the gossip, not of the trouble, of the thing neither of them could name yet, and both of them feared more than anything else in this world. If this story already has you feeling something, stay with me, subscribe to this channel and follow every single part to the end, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The town of Caldwell, Kansas, had a way of remembering everything and forgiving nothing. Lily Spencer had learned that the hard way. 3 years after Robert Spencer's debts had swallowed their farm, their savings, and every last shred of her standing in the community, she was still paying for a man's sins she hadn't committed. The bank had taken the house. The neighbors had taken their distance. And the women of Caldwell's First Methodist Church had taken something worse. They had taken her name and turned it into a warning they whispered to their daughters. "Don't end up like Lily Spencer." She was 34 years old, and she cleaned other people's floors for 30 cents a day. On the morning that changed everything, she'd arrived at the Carson ranch before the sun came up. That was her habit. Earlier meant fewer people to stare at her. She had 2 stables and the main house kitchen to finish before noon, and she worked with the kind of focused silence that left no room for self-pity. Self-pity was a luxury. She didn't have those anymore. She was on her 3rd bucket of water when she heard someone come into the stable behind her. She assumed it was one of the ranch hands. She didn't stop working. "Ma'am." That voice wasn't a ranch hand. She sat back on her heels and turned her head slowly. Ethan Carson stood just inside the stable door, hat in hand, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders, somewhere in his mid-40s, with dark hair going silver at the temples and a jaw that looked like it had been set hard for a very long time. He wasn't handsome in any comfortable way. He was the kind of man whose face had been shaped by years of weather and silence, and something heavier than either. He was also the wealthiest man in Caldwell County, and he was looking at her like he'd never seen her before. "Mr. Carson," Lily said. She got to her feet without rushing, straightened her back, and met his eyes directly. She had stopped shrinking from people's stares a long time ago. "I wasn't told you'd be back early." "Wasn't planning on it." He looked down at the bucket, then back at her. "How long have you been here?" "Since 4. Something moved through his expression. "That's before daylight." "Yes, sir, it is." He was quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable quiet of a man who didn't know what to say, more like the quiet of a man who was thinking carefully about what he was choosing to say next. "Mrs. Spencer," he said finally, "I want to ask you something and I'd appreciate a straight answer." "I'll do my best." "How much is Hattie Delaney paying you to clean her house?" Lily blinked. Of all the questions she'd expected, that wasn't one of them. "That's between me and Mrs. Delaney." "Hattie Delaney told half the town she's paying you 40 cents an hour, Ethan said. "I happen to know she's paying you 20, because Hattie Delaney doesn't do anything that doesn't profit Hattie Delaney, and she knows you can't afford to argue." Lily's jaw tightened. She looked away from him. "I'm not trying to embarrass you," he said, and his voice was gentler than she expected from a man who looked the way he did. "I'm trying to understand something. Understand what Mr. Carson, why a woman who works as hard as you do is still barely getting by." The words landed somewhere deep and unexpected. She kept her face still. She was very good at keeping her face still. "Because that's the way things are," she said. "Are you unsatisfied with the work, if there's something I've missed? The work's fine. The work is better than fine." He put his hat back on and tilted the brim back slightly. "I want to offer you a different arrangement." Lily went very still. "I need someone to manage this house," he said. "Full time. not cleaning it by the hour, managing it. The kitchen, the household accounts, the staff schedule, all of it. My last housekeeper left in March when her daughter took sick up in Wichita, and I haven't replaced her." He paused. "I'll pay you fair wages. You'd have your own room in the house. And you'd answer to me, not to Hattie Delaney or anyone else in this town who thinks 30 cents is what your work is worth." Lily stared at him. Then she picked up her bucket and her rag, and she walked past him out of the stable without a word. He let her go. She would think about it later that he let her go. She walked all the way to the edge of his property before she stopped. She stood there in the July heat with her bucket dripping on her boot and her heart slamming against her ribs in a way she didn't fully understand. It wasn't gratitude she felt. She'd learned to be suspicious of gratitude. It usually came wrapped around something that would cost her later. It wasn't hope exactly. Hope was another luxury she'd given up somewhere around the time the bank had changed the lock on her front door. What she felt was something closer to anger, and she couldn't explain why. She went back the next morning, same time, before daylight. She didn't know why. She told herself she was going back to finish the job she'd been hired to do because Lily Spencer finished what she started. But the truth was something she didn't examine too closely. Ethan Carson was already awake. She heard him in the kitchen when she came through the back door, and she almost turned around again. "Coffee's hot," he said without turning from the stove. "I don't need coffee, Mr. Carson. I need to finish the stable." "Sit down, Mrs. Spencer." She didn't sit. She stood in the doorway with her hands folded in front of her and waited. He turned around. He was holding 2 cups, and he set one on the table in front of the empty chair, like it was a simple and obvious thing. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Offering you coffee. Offering me anything." Her voice was steady. She was always steady now. It was the one thing she still controlled completely. "I know what people will say. I know what they're probably already saying. A widow working in your house, people will talk. They always talk." "They'll talk whether you work here or not," he said. "People in this town have been talking about things that are none of their business since before either of us were born. It's different when it's you. You have a name in this county. You have standing." "I do." He sat down at the table. "And I'm choosing what to do with it." Lily finally walked to the table. She didn't sit, but she stood close enough that the conversation felt less like a standoff. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "There are other women in this county who need work. Women whose reputations aren't—" She stopped, chose a different word. "Women who'd be easier." He looked at her for a long moment. "Because I've been watching you show up to work in this heat before the sun's up for 6 months, he said. "And I have never once seen you ask for anything you didn't earn. And I have a house full of good furniture and a kitchen full of food and rooms that nobody's living in. And I can't think of one good reason why the hardest working woman in Caldwell County should be sleeping in a rented room above the feed store." Lily's throat tightened. She looked down at the cup of coffee. "I haven't said yes," she said. "No, ma'am. You haven't. I'm not saying yes today." "All right." She picked up the coffee. She drank it standing at his kitchen table while the sun came up through the window. She didn't say anything else for a long time, and neither did he. And somehow, in the silence of that kitchen, something shifted. Not between them, not yet, but inside her. Something small and frightened and still alive, after everything. She said yes on a Tuesday. She said it to his foreman, Tom Briggs, who had the decency not to look surprised, just nodded and told her he'd let Mr. Carson know and she could bring her things on Friday. She thanked him and walked away and did not allow herself to think too hard about what she'd just agreed to. By Wednesday, the whole town knew. She heard it first from Margaret Pratt at the dry goods store. Margaret didn't say it to her face. That wasn't how it worked in Caldwell. She said it to the woman next to her in a voice just loud enough to carry. "Well, I heard Lily Spencer's moved herself into the Carson house. Apparently she's the housekeeper now." The pause that followed was its own complete sentence. Lily set her flour on the counter and paid without looking up. But outside, standing on the board sidewalk in the full force of the July sun, she felt the heat of it differently. Not just the weather. The town's attention had a temperature all its own, and it had just swung toward her again. She kept walking. Look, the first week at the Carson Ranch was the strangest week of her life since Robert died. It wasn't what she'd expected. She'd expected formality, distance. A set of instructions slid under a door, and a man who avoided her carefully to protect both their reputations. What she got instead was Ethan Carson eating breakfast in his own kitchen at a normal hour and asking her on the second morning whether she thought the household accounts made sense, the way his previous housekeeper had been keeping them. "Not entirely," she said before she thought better of it. He looked at her over his coffee. "Tell me." "She was carrying the feed costs under the household column," Lily said. "Which means the household budget looks higher than it is, and the ranch operating costs look lower. If anyone were auditing your books, no one audits my books." "That doesn't mean the books should be wrong," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then something that wasn't quite a smile crossed his face. "Fix them." "I beg your pardon?" "If you can see what's wrong, you can see what's right. Fix them. The ledgers are in the office on the left side of the desk." He stood and picked up his hat. "I'd appreciate it before end of week." He left. She stood in the kitchen holding a dish towel and staring at the door he'd walked out of. He'd just handed her his financial records. He trusted her. She didn't know what to do with that. Yike. By the end of the second week, she'd reorganized the household ledgers, negotiated a better price from the butcher by offering a guaranteed monthly account, hired a second kitchen girl to help with the washing, and fix the latch on the back door that had apparently been broken since winter. Tom Briggs stopped her in the yard on a Thursday and said with his hat in his hand and the look of a man being completely sincere, "Ma'am, I don't know how you got all that done, but Mr. Carson's been half a human being easier to work for since Monday." "I just did the job," she said. "Yes, ma'am, you did." He nodded once, put his hat back on, and walked away. She turned before he could see her expression. She didn't expect the conversation they had that third Friday evening. She wasn't expecting any conversation at all. She'd been in the kitchen going over next week's menus when she heard him come in from the yard, heard him stop in the hallway, and then heard him say her name. "Mrs. Spencer." "Mr. Carson." He came to the kitchen doorway. He didn't come in. He stood in the frame the way he often did, like a man who was always keeping himself at a careful distance from wherever he actually wanted to be. "Can I ask you something personal?" She looked up from the menu sheet. "You can ask." "Do you miss it? Having your own place?" The question landed somewhere undefended. She put the pencil down. "Every day," she said. He nodded slowly. He looked like that answer had confirmed something he'd already suspected. "I miss this place being a home," he said. It was quiet and plain the way he said it, not searching for sympathy, just stating a fact. It hasn't been one in a long time. Lily looked at him carefully. What happened to it? He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "My mother died 4 years ago," he said finally. "And before that," he stopped. He looked at his hands. "My sister Lily." He caught himself. "Her name was Lily too. She died 5 years back. And I was..." He stopped again. "I wasn't there for her the way I should have been. I was too proud. Too busy protecting what I thought mattered." He looked up. "I let what this town thought about the choices she made keep me from standing beside her. And she died knowing that." The kitchen was very quiet. "I'm sorry," Lily Spencer said. And she meant it the way you mean something when it reaches all the way down through your own grief and touches something specific. "So am I," he said. He pushed off the doorframe. "I'll let you finish." He walked back down the hallway. She heard his office door close, She sat there for a long time before she picked up the pencil again. Mrs. Whitlock came to the house on a Saturday morning in the third week. Lily answered the door. She recognized Clara Whitlock the way you recognize a particular kind of weather by the specific quality of cold it brings. "Mrs. Spencer," Clara said, "I'd like to speak with Mr. Carson. He's in the East Field this morning. I can tell him you called." Clara Whitlock looked at her with the slow deliberateness of a woman who was saying more with her eyes than her mouth. "I'll wait," she said. "Of course. Come in." Lily stepped back from the door. Clara came in and stood in the entry hall looking around with the careful attention of a woman cataloging evidence. "You've made some changes," she said. "I've done my job," Lily answered. Clara turned to look at her directly. "Mrs. Spencer, I'm going to be plain with you because I think plain is kinder than what you'll hear from other people later. Please do. This arrangement is going to damage Mr. Carson's standing, whatever his intentions are. The word intentions stretched just slightly. The town is watching. And what the town is watching isn't a professional arrangement." Lily held Clara's gaze without blinking. "What is it watching?" "A man who hasn't looked twice at a woman in 4 years," Clara said, "who has suddenly installed a widow in his home and given her the run of his household accounts." She paused for weight. "You understand what I'm saying?" "I understand exactly what you're saying," Lily said, "and I'd like to ask you something in return." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Have you seen anything improper in this house?" "That's not the point." "Have you?" A beat of silence. "No," Clara admitted. "Then with respect, Mrs. Whitlock," Lily said, and she kept her voice absolutely even. "What the town is watching is a woman doing her job well, and I'm going to keep doing it." Clara Whitlock left without waiting for Ethan Carson. Lily closed the door, leaned her back against it for just a moment, let out a breath that shook more than she wanted it to. Then she straightened up and went back to the kitchen to finish the menus. Ethan came in from the East Field at noon. Tom Briggs told him Clara Whitlock had been by. "What did she want?" Ethan asked. "Don't rightly know," Tom said. "Mrs. Spencer handled it." Ethan went to the kitchen. Lily was rolling pastry dough at the table, and she didn't look up when he came in. "Tom says Clara Whitlock was here," he said. "She was." "What did she say?" Lily kept rolling the dough. "She advised me that the town is watching this arrangement with concern," she said. "She suggested it might damage your standing." He was quiet for a moment. "And what did you say?" "I asked her if she'd seen anything improper." Lily finally looked up. She said no. "I told her I planned to keep doing my job." He looked at her across the kitchen. Something in his expression shifted, not quite the way a man looks at a woman he wants, not yet. More like the way a man looks at something he'd stopped believing still existed. "Good," he said. "You should know it won't stop there," Lily said. She said it plainly without drama. "It won't be just Clara Whitlock. There'll be more. And at some point you'll have to decide how much your standing in this town is worth to you." "I know," he said. "Do you?" He held her gaze. "Mrs. Spencer, I have already lost things in this life that mattered to me because I was more afraid of what this town thought than what was right." He said it quietly and completely. "I don't intend to do that again." Lily looked at him for a long moment. Then she went back to rolling the dough. "Lunch will be ready at 1, she said. "Thank you," he said, and walked back out to his work. She listened to his boots on the hall floor until she couldn't hear them anymore. Then she stood there in the heat of that July kitchen, her hands pressed flat against the table, her heart doing something she had not given it permission to do. She was very still for a very long time, and then she finished making the pastry. The town didn't wait long. By the following Monday, Lily had counted 3 separate women who crossed to the other side of the street when they saw her coming. She counted them the way she counted everything now, quietly, without expression, filing the information away somewhere useful. She didn't slow her stride. She didn't look after them. She went to the dry goods store, bought what she needed for the week's menu, and walked back to the Carson ranch in the same straight line she always walked. But when she got to the kitchen and set the parcels on the table, her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from something closer to fury. She pressed them flat against the table until they stopped. Tom Briggs appeared in the kitchen doorway that afternoon with his hat twisted in both hands, which was always the sign that he had something to say he didn't want to say. "Mrs. Spencer, you got a minute?" "I've got several. Sit down, Tom." He sat. He put his hat on this table. He looked at it instead of her. "There's talk going around," he said. "I know. Bad talk." He finally looked up. "Worse than usual." "How bad?" He hesitated. Reverend Aldous preached Sunday about the corrupting influence of he didn't use names, but everybody knew. Half the congregation turned up at the fence post outside afterward and... He stopped. "There's a group of them saying they're going to petition the county board, say there's something improper happening out here, try to use it to challenge Mr. Carson's land grant renewal." Lily went very still. They'd threatened his land grant over gossip. "It ain't just gossip anymore, ma'am. Once Aldous put it from the pulpit, it became something they could use," she said. Tom nodded. He looked miserable about it. Lily sat down across from him. "Tom, has anything improper happened in this house?" "No, ma'am. Not a single thing." "Then they have nothing." "They don't need much," he said quietly. "Not in this county. The board's got 3 men on it who've wanted Mr. Carson's east pasture for 15 years. They'd use a church rumor if it gave them an opening." Lily stared at the table. She thought about the ledgers she'd reorganized, the accounts she'd straightened, the household running cleaner and smoother than it had in years. She thought about a woman named Lily, a dead woman with the same name as her, and a brother who hadn't stood beside her when it counted. She thought about Ethan Carson standing in her kitchen doorway saying, "I don't intend to do that again." "Don't tell him yet," she said. Tom blinked. "Ma'am?" "Don't tell Mr. Carson yet. Let me think first." Tom looked at her for a long moment. "He's going to find out on his own. Probably already knows." "Probably," she said. "But give me until this evening." He picked up his hat and stood. "Yes, ma'am." He walked to the door, then stopped. "For what it's worth," he said without turning around, "every one of my boys thinks you're the best thing that's walked through that gate in 10 years. He put his hat on. "Just thought you ought to know that." He left before she could answer. She sat there alone in the kitchen for a full minute. Then she got up and started on the bread because her hands needed something to do while her mind worked. She was still working when Ethan came through the back door an hour later. She heard him stop when he saw her. "You already know," she said without looking up. "About Aldous, yes." "And the land grant petition." A pause that told her he hadn't known about that part. She heard him pull out a chair and sit down. "Tell me," he said. She told him. All of it. Plainly the way she said everything. No softening, no dramatizing, just the facts as Tom had laid them out. When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. "I see," Ethan said. "I'll leave," she said. "If that's what this requires." "No." "Ethan." It was the first time she'd used his name without the Mr. attached, and they both noticed it. She set down the dough and turned to face him. "I am not going to be the reason you lose land your family has held for 40 years. I'm not worth that." Something shifted hard in his expression. "Don't say that." "It's practical. It's wrong." He stood up. He wasn't a man who made large physical gestures. He was the kind of man who went very still when something mattered, but he stood up and the kitchen felt smaller for it. "Lily, if I let them push you out of this house, I am making the same choice I made 5 years ago. A different woman, A different set of circumstances and the exact same cowardice dressed up as practicality. I did that once. His jaw was set. I will not do it again. She looked at him steadily. This isn't the same. No, he said. It's worse. Because this time I know exactly what I'm choosing between. The air between them went strange and charged. Lily was the first to look away. She turned back to the bread. Her hands weren't shaking this time. They were very steady in the way that things are steady when they are holding a great deal of weight carefully. Then we need to figure out how to fight it, she said. Yes, he said. We do. And just like that, without either of them naming it, they stopped being an employer and an employee standing in a kitchen. They became something harder to define and more dangerous to be. The letter arrived on Wednesday. It was from the county board addressed to Ethan Carson, formally requesting his appearance at a hearing regarding his land grant renewal. The date was 3 weeks out. The language was careful and official and completely transparent in its intent. Ethan read it at the breakfast table. He folded it and set it beside his plate without a word. Lily refilled his coffee and waited. They're actually doing it, he said. Yes. He looked up at her. You're not surprised. Tom warned me it was coming. People in this town move fast when they think they've got something. What they've got is nothing. He pushed the letter aside. A preacher's sermon and Clara Whitlock's opinion. And 3 board members who want your east pasture, Lily said. He looked at her sharply. Tom told me about the pasture situation, she said. How long have they been trying to acquire it? Since my father refused to sell it to Harold Greer in 1871. Ethan's voice was flat and even. Greer's son Nathan is on the board now. He's been waiting for an angle. Then this isn't about me, she said quietly. I'm the angle. He was very quiet for a moment. Lily. I'm not saying that to be self-pitying. I'm saying it because it matters to how we fight it. She sat down across from him, which she almost never did. She brought the letter in front of her, turned it around, and read it again. They can't challenge a land grant without documented cause. A sermon isn't documentation. Neither is gossip. What they need is something on record. Which they don't have. Which they'll try to manufacture, she said. Between now and this hearing, someone will try to create an incident. Something they can point to. She looked up at him. We need to be careful. We, he said. She met his eyes. Unless you'd rather face it alone. He held her gaze for a long moment. No, he said. I wouldn't. She nodded and looked back at the letter, but she felt his eyes stay on her for a beat longer, and she felt the warmth of it, like a hand placed carefully over something bruised. The incident they'd been waiting for came sooner than expected. It was Saturday afternoon, and Lily had gone into town for the weekly accounts, something she did every Saturday with the household ledger and a list from the kitchen. She was standing at the counter of the mercantile when she heard Nathan Greer's voice behind her. She'd never spoken to Nathan Greer directly. He was about 40 heavy through the middle, with the particular confidence of a man who had inherited both his money and his grudges. He was talking to the man beside him, but his voice was pitched to Carrie. It's a simple question of character, Greer was saying. A man who keeps that kind of company in his own house. What does that tell you about his fitness to manage county resources, his judgment? The mercantile went quiet in the pointed way that meant everyone was listening. Lily set the ledger on the counter. She did not turn around. She addressed the clerk, a young man named Henry, who was going red in the face on her behalf. I need to settle the Carson household account, Henry, she said clearly. And I'll need receipts for everything dated and signed if you please. Yes, ma'am, Henry said quickly. That woman's got nerve, Greer said to nobody in particular, walking around like she's got a right to the Carson name. Lily turned around. She turned slowly and completely, and she looked at Nathan Greer the way she had learned to look at men who thought volume was the same thing as power. Mr. Greer, she said. He blinked. He clearly hadn't expected her to address him directly. I work for Ethan Carson as his housekeeper, she said. I manage his household accounts. I am standing in this store on his business. She held up the ledger. That is the entirety of my relationship with the Carson name. She paused just long enough. If you have a dispute with how Mr. Carson manages his property, you have the right to bring it before the board, which I understand you're already doing. She turned back to the counter. Henry, those receipts, please. The mercantile stayed quiet for a full 10 seconds. Then someone on the far side of the store laughed, a short, involuntary sound, quickly suppressed. But it was there. Henry processed her account with a speed that suggested he wanted to be on the right side of this moment. Greer said nothing else. She felt him behind her, a thick silence that was working very hard to become something and couldn't quite get there. She walked out with the ledger under her arm and her back perfectly straight. She made it to the end of the block before her knees went slightly soft. She stopped, breathed once, then kept walking. Ethan was in the yard when she got back. He took one look at her face and said, "What happened?" "I handled it," she said. "Lily." She stopped walking. Nathan Greer made remarks in the mercantile. I addressed them, directly and clearly. It's done. His jaw tightened. "What kind of remarks?" "The kind that were meant to be witnessed," she said. "He wanted a reaction from me. He wanted a scene he could point to. I didn't give him one." She looked at Ethan carefully. That's the game he's playing. Every time. He wants something he can use. "I should have been there." "No," she said firmly. "You being there would have made it worse. Two of us against one of him reads as defensiveness. One woman handling her own business reads as," she thought about it, "as exactly what it was." He stared at her. "You're not angry." "Of course I'm angry," she said. "I've been angry for 3 years, Ethan. I just choose what to do with it." She handed him the ledger. "Your household accounts are settled through the end of the month, and Henry at the mercantile is firmly on our side for what that's worth." He took the ledger. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she was starting to recognize, the one where he was holding back something he hadn't yet decided to say. "You are the most remarkable woman I have ever known," he said. It came out plainly. He didn't appear to have planned to say it. He looked slightly surprised that he had. Lily looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "The bread's going to burn," and walked into the house. She heard him exhale behind her, something between a laugh and a sigh, and she allowed herself just inside the back door where he couldn't see 1 full second of something that might have been a smile. That evening after supper, she found him in the office. He was at the desk with a stack of papers and the look of a man who had been staring at them long enough that they'd stopped making sense. "The hearing is in 18 days, he said without looking up. "I know. I've been going through the original land grant documents, the survey records, trying to find anything they could challenge." He rubbed his face with one hand. "There's nothing wrong with the filing. It's solid." "Then their case is weak," Lily said. "A weak case is still a hearing, still a public record, still 3 men on that board who want to find against me." He looked up. "Lily, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Always." He looked at her steadily. "If we went into that hearing as something more than an employer and employee, if there were a formal understanding between us, they'd lose their argument entirely. There'd be nothing improper about the arrangement at all." He paused. "I'm not asking you to—" He stopped. "I'm not asking that. I just want to know if you've thought about it." The room went very quiet. Lily sat down in the chair across from his desk. She took her time before she spoke. "I've thought about it," she said. And I won't be your solution to a legal problem," she said. It was quiet and absolute. "If there is ever anything between us, any formal understanding as you put it, it won't be because it serves a strategy. It'll be because it's true." She held his gaze. "Do you understand the difference?" He held her gaze right back. "Yes," he said. "I do." Good. She stood. Then we fight the hearing on the merits, which are on your side. She moved toward the door. I've already written out every piece of documentation I can account for every household receipt, every account ledger, every signed record since I started here. If they want evidence of what goes on in this house, I'll give them evidence. She stopped in the doorway and looked back. We're not hiding anything, Ethan. We never were. That's the strongest thing we've got. She left him at the desk with the papers and the lamp. She heard him pick up his pen. And in the hallway alone, she stopped walking and pressed her hand once flat and brief against her sternum over the thing that was growing there, whether she gave it permission or not. She had meant every word she said to him, but she had also counted the 18 days, and she was not sure what that meant yet, only that it meant something. Something that had started the morning she turned around in a stable and found a man watching her with eyes that saw more than she had intended to show anyone ever again. 18 days. She went to her room and she did not sleep for a very long time. The next 17 days moved like water before a storm deceptively calm on the surface and churning with everything underneath. Lily worked. That was what she did when her mind needed somewhere to go. She reorganized the pantry stores, finalized the autumn supply orders 3 weeks early, and spent 2 evenings at the kitchen table going through every financial record the Carson Ranch had produced in the last 4 years. Not because Ethan asked her to, because she needed to understand the ground they were standing on before someone tried to pull it out from under them. What she found on the 4th evening stopped her cold. She sat with the ledger open in front of her for a long moment. Then she got up, walked down the hall, and knocked on the office door. "Come in." She set the ledger on his desk and put her finger on the entry dated March of the previous year. "Who handled the account transfers when your previous housekeeper left?" Ethan leaned forward and looked. "Tom coordinated with the bank. Why?" "Because there's a $300 discrepancy between what the bank received and what the household account shows." She kept her voice even. "It's small enough to miss if you're not looking. But it's there." He went very still. "Someone was skimming," she said. "Or someone was setting it up to look like I was," he said. He said it slowly, like a man watching a shape come clear through fog. "If the board finds a discrepancy in the accounts during the hearing, it looks like financial mismanagement, which gives them documented cause to challenge the grant renewal." Lily closed the ledger. "They've been planning this longer than we thought." Ethan sat back in his chair. He was quiet for a long moment. "How long have you known?" "About an hour. And you've already figured out what it means." "I've been thinking about it since I sat down with these books," she said. "Someone with access to the household accounts planted this. It had to be someone who knew the filing schedule for the grant renewal." "That's a short list," Ethan said. "Yes," she said. "It is." He looked at her. "Can it be corrected?" "With the right documentation, yes. The original invoices from March show the correct amounts. The discrepancy is only in the transfer record, not the source documents. If we bring both to the hearing and have the bank manager confirm the error." She paused. "It becomes evidence of tampering, not mismanagement." He was watching her with that expression again, the one she'd stopped knowing what to do with. "You just turned their weapon around," he said. "I found the discrepancy," she said. "That's all." "Lily," he leaned forward. "That's not all, that's everything." She picked up the ledger. "I'll need to ride to the bank tomorrow before they open. I want the original transfer receipts in our hands before the hearing, not sitting in a file somewhere accessible." She moved toward the door. "I'll go early." "I'll come with you." She turned. "You don't need to." "I know I don't need to." He was already standing. "I'll come with you." She looked at him for a moment. She thought about arguing. She decided not to. "Before 6, she said. "Before 6, he agreed. She went back to her room. She lay on her back in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about $300 and a short list of names and a man who stood up every time she expected him to stay seated. They were at the bank when it opened. The manager, a careful, small-boned man named Elias Pruitt, went pale when Lily laid the two sets of records side by side on his desk and pointed to the discrepancy. "Mr. Pruitt," she said, "I need you to tell me which record is accurate." Pruitt looked at the documents. He looked at Ethan. He looked at Lily. He looked at the documents again. "The invoice is accurate," he said quietly. "The transfer record." He stopped. He cleared his throat. "I'll need to pull the original processing file." "Please," Lily said. He was gone for 11 minutes. Ethan stood by the window. Lily sat in the chair across from Pruitt's desk and did not fidget. When Pruitt came back, he was carrying a file and wearing the expression of a man who had just realized he was standing in the middle of something much larger than a bookkeeping error. "The original processing record matches the invoice," he said carefully. "The transfer record you have here has been amended." "Amended by whom?" Ethan asked. Pruitt set the file on the desk. He pointed to a set of initials on the amended document. Ethan looked at them. His jaw went tight. "That's Nathan Greer's clerk," he said. "I cannot confirm. Those are his initials, Elias. I've seen his signature on county documents for 15 years. Pruitt was quiet. He was doing the calculation of where he was safest, which was what careful men always did. "I'll need a certified copy of the original processing record," Lily said. Her voice was steady and businesslike. "Dated and signed by you today, and a written statement that the transfer record in the household ledger does not reflect the bank's original documentation." Pruitt looked at her. "Mrs. Spencer, if this goes before the county board—" "It is going before the county board in 16 days, she said. "I'd rather you be on the right side of the record." He signed the statement. He made the copies. He shook Ethan's hand on the way out with the grip of a man who wanted it on record that he had cooperated. They walked out into the July morning, and Ethan stopped on the sidewalk. "They were going to frame me," he said. "Just that, plain and flat." "Yes," Lily said, "for nothing. For the east pasture." "And to remove you as an obstacle," she said. "Your father wouldn't sell. You wouldn't sell. This was always going to happen eventually. I just happened to provide the opportunity for the timing." He turned to look at her sharply. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Make yourself responsible for what they chose to do." His voice was quiet and absolutely certain. "You didn't give them a reason. They manufactured one. That's on them." Lily held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked away first, which she almost never did. "We should get back," she said. "Lily." She stopped. "Thank you," he said, quietly, completely, "for finding it." She started walking again, because if she stood still for one more second in the July heat, with him looking at her that way, she was going to say something she wasn't yet ready to say. The news hit town by Friday. She didn't know how small towns had their own circulation faster and less forgiving than any newspaper, but by Friday afternoon, the whisper had shifted. She heard it from young Henry at the Mercantile, who leaned across the counter and said in a low, excited voice, "Ma'am, I hear there's going to be something at the hearing. Something about the county records." "Is that so?" She said, her voice perfectly neutral. "They say someone tampered with documents." His eyes were wide. "Somebody on the board side." "I wouldn't speculate about that," she said. "Those are county matters." "Yes, ma'am." He paused. "But is it true?" She looked at him calmly. "What do you think would happen, Henry, to a man who tampered with financial records in a county proceeding?" He thought about it. "Prison, maybe." "That's what I'd think too," she said. She paid for her order and left. Behind her, she heard Henry tell the next customer in an urgent whisper that he reckoned somebody was in a whole world of trouble. Good, she thought. Let them calculate their risks. The twist she hadn't anticipated came from a direction she should have seen and didn't. It was Sunday. She'd gone to the small chapel on the south side of town, not Aldis's church, but the quieter one. The one attended mostly by ranch families and working people who didn't have time or inclination for Reverend Aldis's particular brand of righteous theater. She was almost at the door when she heard her name spoken behind her. She turned. Standing at the bottom of the chapel steps was a woman she hadn't seen in 3 years. Margaret Finley, or she had been Margaret Finley before she married Daniel Pruitt, the bank manager's younger brother. She and Lily had been friends once, before Robert's debts, before everything. They looked at each other across a silence full of history. "Lily," Margaret said. "Margaret." Margaret climbed 2 steps. She looked tired and something else, something effortful, like a woman who had rehearsed what she was about to say and was still not sure she could get through it. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Before the hearing." Lily waited. "Nathan Greer came to see Daniel," Margaret said. Her voice was barely above a murmur. "3 weeks ago. He wanted Daniel to—" She stopped, swallowed. He wanted Daniel to certify that the bank had irregularities in the Carson accounts, confirm the amended record. She looked at Lily directly. Daniel refused, but Greer told him that if he didn't cooperate, he'd make sure the bank's examination report from last spring got reviewed. Said there were findings in it that could make trouble for Elias. Lily went very still. They were pressuring Elias Pruitt through his brother. Yes. Margaret's hands were clenched together at her waist. Daniel told me. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't— Her voice caught. He's not a brave man, my Daniel, but he's not a dishonest one, and he told me because he couldn't carry it. Does Elias know his brother was approached? He does now. Daniel told him yesterday. Margaret looked at her with an expression caught between guilt and something resolute. Elias is going to the hearing. He's going to tell them what Greer's man did to that transfer record. Daniel wrote it all down, what Greer said, what he asked for. It's signed. Lily looked at this woman who had crossed the street to avoid her 18 months ago, who had not spoken her name in 3 years, who was standing on a chapel step in her Sunday dress, with her hands shaking slightly, offering what she had. Margaret, she said carefully, why are you telling me this? Margaret looked at her. Because I stopped being your friend when you needed one, she said. And I've been ashamed of it for a long time. She paused. And because what they're doing to you and to Ethan Carson is wrong. And I am tired of watching wrong things happen and doing nothing. The chapel bell started ringing overhead. Neither of them moved. Daniel's testimony, Lily said. Combined with the bank records, it's enough to not just defeat the challenge. It's enough to bring charges against Greer. I know, Margaret said. That will make him dangerous. I know that too. Margaret's chin came up. Are you going to tell Mr. Carson? Today, Lily said. Will Daniel be willing to speak at the hearing himself, or only in writing? He'll speak, Margaret said. He decided this morning, told me at breakfast. Something moved through her expression, something that looked like pride and surprise at finding it there. He said if the bank manager can stand up, he reckoned he could too. Lily nodded slowly. She held out her hand. Margaret looked at it for a moment. Then she took it. They shook once firmly like women who had both been in fights and knew what a handshake actually meant. Thank you, Lily said. Margaret nodded. She went into the chapel. Lily stood on the steps for a long moment in the July heat, feeling the shape of what was coming into view. They weren't just defending Ethan's land grant anymore. They were building a case. And Nathan Greer had no idea how many people had quietly decided they were done being afraid of him. She told Ethan that afternoon. All of it. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things about him she had come to depend on, without meaning to the quality of his attention when something mattered. Most men listened for the pause where they could speak. Ethan listened to understand. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Daniel Pruitt," he said. "I wouldn't have predicted that." "Neither would I." "Greer pushed too hard," Ethan said. "He always does. He mistakes fear for loyalty." He looked at her. "How many people is that now? Elias Pruitt, Daniel Pruitt, Tom Briggs, Henry at the Mercantile." "This isn't a count," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's a community." He paused on the word like it meant something specific to him. "There's something else," she said. She set her hands flat on the desk, a habit she'd developed when she was about to say something she'd rather not say. "Greer is going to find out his leverage over the Pruitts is gone, and when he does, he'll shift. He'll look for something else to use." She looked at Ethan directly. "He may come after me differently. Try to find something in my past he can use. Robert's debts, the foreclosure, things that make me look—" She chose the word carefully, unstable, untrustworthy. "Let him try. Ethan, I need you to be prepared for it to be ugly. For whatever he digs up to be said in a public room in front of people who already half believe it." She held his gaze. "It's not going to be dignified, and you standing next to me when it happens is exactly where I intend to be," he said, quietly, completely, no performance in it. She looked at him for a long moment. "You know," she said, "you are considerably more stubborn than you appear." The corner of his mouth moved. It was the closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him in days. "I've been told." She stood. "I'm going to write to the county registrar's office tonight. Request the original grant survey records to have as supporting documentation." She gathered the papers she'd brought in. "We're not going to walk into that hearing hoping for the best. We're going to walk in with more documentation than they can argue with in a week." "Lily." His voice stopped her at the door. She turned. He was looking at her with that expression, the open one, the one that sat unguarded on a face that was almost never unguarded. "When this is over," he said. He stopped, seemed to make a decision. "When this is over, I want to have a conversation with you. Not about the ranch, not about the hearing." He held her gaze. "About something else entirely." The air in the room changed. Lily stood in the doorway for a long moment. Her heart was doing something she'd given up managing. She kept her face careful and her voice even, and she said, "One thing at a time, Mr. Carson." She walked out, down the hallway, into the kitchen. She set the papers on the table and stood with both hands on the counter and breathed in and out slowly, like a woman who has just stepped to the very edge of something and looked down and found that it was not in fact bottomless, that it had a floor, and that the floor looked solid. She stood there for a long time. Then she sat down, pulled out a sheet of paper, and began the letter to the county registrar, because the hearing was in 11 days, and love, or whatever this was, that kept pulling at the center of her chest like a tide, was going to have to wait until the fight was finished. But it was there. She stopped pretending it wasn't. It was absolutely, undeniably, terrifyingly there. The letter from the county registrar arrived on a Wednesday, and it was not what Lily had asked for. She read it standing at the kitchen table, and she read it twice to make sure she understood it correctly. Then she folded it, set it on the desk in the office, and went to find Tom Briggs. "Where is he?" she asked. "North fence line." "Why?" "What's happened?" She handed him the letter. He read it. His face did something complicated. "They're delaying the hearing," he said. "No," she said. "Read the second paragraph." He read it again. "They're moving it up to Saturday." He looked up. "That's 5 days from now. That's before the county registrar can produce the original survey records I requested," she said, "which I filed for 8 days ago and which should have taken 10 days to process. Someone in the registrar's office moved this hearing date specifically to cut off our documentation." Tom handed the letter back slowly. "Greer." "Greer," she confirmed. Tom took his hat off and turned it in his hands. 5 days. Can we still? I don't know yet. She was already thinking, and her voice went quiet in the way it always did when she was working through something fast. The bank records and Daniel Pruitt's written account are already in hand. Elias confirmed he'll testify. That's solid. She paused. What I wanted from the registrar was the original boundary survey proof that the Carson land grant predates Greer's family's claim to the adjacent parcel by 11 years. Without it, they can argue the eastern boundary is disputed. Can you get it another way? She thought for exactly 3 seconds. The land office in Wichita would have a duplicate filing, she said. It's the original submission point before the county took over record keeping. She looked at Tom. How fast can a rider get to Wichita and back? Tom put his hat on. Fast, he said. If it's the right rider. Get me the right rider, she said. Today. He was already moving. She went back inside and stood in the kitchen and let herself feel the pressure of 5 days closing in around them. She gave herself 45 seconds to feel it. Then she started making a list. Yes, Ethan came in from the north fence at noon and found the list on the table and Lily at the stove, and something in the quality of the silence that told him immediately that something had changed. She handed him the letter without preamble. He read it. His expression didn't shift the way most men's would. No explosion, no visible alarm. Just a tightening around the jaw and a stillness that she had learned meant he was angry in the careful, controlled way that was more dangerous than shouting. Saturday, he said. Yes. He's trying to catch us without the survey. He succeeded, she said. Almost. I've sent a rider to Wichita for the duplicate filing. He left an hour ago. Ethan set the letter down. He looked at her. You already handled it. I handled the first part of it. Whether the rider gets back in time is less certain. She turned back to the stove. Sit down. Eat something. We have work to do this afternoon. He sat. He watched her move around the kitchen with the focused efficiency that she always had, the way she never wasted a movement or a word, and he said quietly, What else? She brought 2 plates to the table and sat across from him. Greer knows we've got the bank records. He knows the Pruitt situation fell apart for him. He's going to come at the hearing with something we haven't seen yet. She looked at him directly. I've been trying to figure out what it is, what he still has that he thinks is strong enough. And I think it's me, she said. Ethan was quiet. I think he's going to stand up in that hearing and argue that your judgment as a land grant holder is compromised, that you've allowed a woman of questionable character to manage your household accounts, that the financial discrepancy wasn't tampering, it was negligence on my part covered up by the 2 of us together. She said it plainly the way she said everything hard. He reframes it. Instead of him being the criminal, we're the incompetents, or worse. That argument falls apart the moment Elias Pruitt confirms the tampering. Only if the board lets Elias finish what he's saying, she said. Greer has friends on that board. They can limit testimony, redirect questioning, make it messy enough that the truth gets buried in procedure. She paused. We need someone in that room who can't be ignored. Someone the board can't afford to disrespect or cut off. Ethan thought about it. Judge Harlan. She blinked. Warren Harlan? He's retired. He's retired from the bench. He still practices law in an advisory capacity, and he despises Nathan Greer with a specific and well-documented passion going back to a property dispute in 1874 that Greer won by bribing a clerk. Ethan's voice was flat and precise. If Warren Harlan walks into that hearing room as our legal representative, Greer's friends on the board will have to choose between protecting Greer and protecting themselves from a retired federal judge with a long memory and no patience for corruption. Lily stared at him. You've been thinking about this too. I've been thinking about it since we found the discrepancy. He met her eyes. I just didn't want to say it until I knew whether Harlan would agree. And does he? I sent him a letter 4 days ago. He replied yesterday. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and set a folded piece of paper on the table between them. She picked it up and read it. It was brief, direct, and ended with a sentence that made something release in her chest like a fist slowly opening. "Tell your young woman she found exactly the right thread to pull. I'll be there Saturday." She set the letter down. "Your young woman," she said. Something crossed Ethan's face. He's 72. Everyone is young to him. She said. She picked up her fork. "That changes the balance considerably." "Yes," he said. "It does." They ate in a silence that was comfortable in the way that silences only become after weeks of two people learning the rhythms of each other's company. Outside, the July heat pressed against the house, and somewhere in the yard, one of the hands was whistling something tuneless and cheerful, and Lily thought that this ordinary noon, with its ordinary sounds, was the kind of moment she had stopped letting herself want. She ate her lunch and did not examine that thought too closely. Thursday brought the next thing she hadn't anticipated. Clara Whitlock came to the ranch again. But this time she didn't come alone, and she didn't come with the cold measuring look she'd worn on her first visit. She came with Maggie Williams. Maggie Williams was 81 years old, small as a sparrow, and had lived in Caldwell County longer than any courthouse record currently on file. She had outlasted 4 mayors, 2 fires, a drought, and 3 men who had tried to tell her what to do. She was the closest thing the county had to a living institution, and when she spoke in a public room, people listened the way they listen to things they know in their bones are true. Lily opened the door and found the two of them standing on the porch, Clara with an expression that was working hard, at humble, and Maggie Williams with her cane and her sharp black eyes, and an expression that needed no work at all, because it had never been anything but exactly what it was. "Mrs. Spencer," Maggie said, "I'd like to speak with you and Ethan Carson together, if you please." Lily stepped back from the door without a word. She went and found Ethan. He came to the parlor and stopped when he saw Maggie Williams sitting in his best chair like it had been built for her. Something shifted in his face. Something young and careful, the way men look when they are in the presence of people they actually respect. "Mrs. Williams," he said. "Sit down, Ethan." Maggie pointed her cane at the chair across from her. "You too, Mrs. Spencer." They sat. "I'm going to be plain," Maggie said, "because I'm 81 and I've run out of patience for anything else." She looked between the two of them. "I know what Nathan Greer is doing. I know why he moved the hearing, and I know what he intends to say in that room on Saturday about this woman and about you." She pointed the cane at Ethan. "What I want to know is what you intend to do about it." "We have legal representation," Ethan said. "Judge Harlan has agreed." "Warren Harlan is fine for the legal question," Maggie said. "I'm not asking about the legal question. I'm asking about the other question." She looked at Lily with eyes that had seen everything and forgotten nothing. "Mrs. Spencer, this town has treated you badly for 3 years. I know it. Clara knows it. Half the women in this county know it and said nothing, which makes them as guilty as the ones who were cruel." Clara looked at the floor. "I am asking you directly, what do you want out of Saturday?" Lily was quiet for a moment. "I want the truth on record," she said. "Whatever was done to those accounts, I want it documented and confirmed in a public proceeding. I want Ethan's land grant renewed without condition, and I want Nathan Greer to answer for what he did." "And personally," Maggie said, "what do you want for yourself?" The room was very quiet. "I want to be left alone to do my work," Lily said, "without the town deciding what my work means about my character." Maggie nodded once slowly. Then she turned to Ethan. "And you?" Ethan looked at Lily before he answered. Just for a moment. Long enough. "The same," he said. "And more than that. But that's a conversation for after Saturday." Maggie looked between them with the expression of a woman who has read the whole book and is watching other people find the first chapter. "I'm going to be at that hearing," she said. "Clara is coming too. and I've spoken to 6 other women in this county who feel the same way I do about what's been done here." She stood slowly, using the cane. "Nathan Greer thinks he's got a room full of allies. What he doesn't know is that a room full of allies and a room full of frightened people look identical until someone stops being frightened." She looked at Lily. "You stopped being frightened a long time ago, Mrs. Spencer. Some of the rest of us are just now catching up." Lily stood. She looked at this small, ancient, formidable woman and felt something move through her that she couldn't name. Gratitude wasn't big enough for it, and relief wasn't specific enough. "Mrs. Williams," she said, "thank you." Maggie waved the cane once dismissively. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me Sunday when it's done." She looked at Clara. "Come on. We've got 2 more houses to visit before supper." Clara stood. She paused at the door and turned to Lily with an expression that had lost its cold precision and replaced it with something considerably more uncomfortable to wear. "I was wrong," Clara said. "About a number of things." She said it quickly, like something that needed to be out of her mouth before she lost the nerve. "I won't ask you to forgive me today, but I wanted you to know I know it." She walked out before Lily could respond. Lily stood in the parlor for a moment. Then she exhaled. "Well," she said. "Yes," Ethan said from behind her. He sounded slightly stunned. "Maggie Williams," Lily said. "You couldn't have led with that. She only agreed yesterday evening. She told me not to say anything until she could say it herself." He paused. "She has opinions about how things should be done." "I noticed?" Lily turned around. He was closer than she expected, standing just a few feet away, and the afternoon light was doing something to the planes of his face that she refused to think about. "Saturday," she said. "Saturday," he agreed. "We're going to win," she said. Not as comfort, as assessment. She said it the way she said everything factual. He looked at her steadily. "I know." "And after," she stopped herself. "After," he said, and his voice was quiet and certain. "We have that conversation." She held his gaze for one long moment. Then she turned and went back to the kitchen because there were still 2 days of preparation between here and Saturday, and she was not a woman who let a feeling stop her hands from working. But her hands were not entirely steady as she reached for the kettle. The writer came back from Wichita on Friday evening, 2 hours before dark, and he was grinning. He handed Lily the document tube before he'd even properly dismounted, and she pulled the papers out right there in the yard and read the first 3 lines and said, "Yes," with a quiet, total conviction that made 2 nearby ranch hands look at each other sideways. The duplicate survey record was there, dated 1863. 11 years before the Greer family's adjacent land filing. The boundary lines were precise and unambiguous, witnessed and signed by a federal land surveyor, whose credentials were in the same file. Tom Briggs looked over her shoulder. "Is that enough?" "That's everything," she said. She rolled the papers carefully and put them back in the tube. "Get this to Judge Harlan's hotel room tonight. Don't leave it with the desk clerk. Put it in his hands." "Yes, ma'am." Tom took the tube and headed for his horse without breaking stride. Lily stood in the yard in the Friday evening heat and let herself feel for exactly a moment something that wasn't strategy and wasn't preparation and wasn't control. It felt like the ground becoming solid beneath her feet. It felt like a door she'd thought was permanently closed, swinging open 1 careful inch. She heard Ethan come out of the barn behind her. She didn't turn around. "The survey records came," she said. "I heard." He stopped beside her. Not behind her, beside her. She noticed the difference. They stood there together for a moment in the cooling yard. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Are you?" "Yes." He was quiet for a beat. "Lily, whatever happens in that room, it's going to go the right way," she said. "I know. But whatever happens, you should know that none of this changes anything for me." The land, the grant, the hearing. He paused. None of it is why you matter. She was very still. You matter, he said, because of who you are. Not what you found in my ledgers. Not what you've built in my house. Not what you're going to help me prove in that room tomorrow. His voice was the quietest she'd ever heard it. You, Lily. The woman who showed up before daylight because she said she finishes what she starts. She stood there with the evening settling around them and the sound of the ranch going quiet for the night, and something inside her chest cracking open like ground after a long rain. Ethan, she said. Her voice wasn't entirely steady. You don't have to say anything, he said. Not tonight. Tomorrow first. She turned to look at him. He was looking straight ahead, giving her the grace of not being watched in the moment that something that had been locked for 3 years came unlocked. She was grateful for that. It was such a specific and particular kindness. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he confirmed. She went inside. She climbed the stairs to her room and sat on the edge of the bed and pressed both hands over her face and stayed there for a long time. Not crying, not afraid, just feeling fully and without defense. Everything that she had kept carefully managed and contained and controlled for so long that she'd almost convinced herself it was gone. It wasn't gone. It had been waiting with the same stubborn patience she brought to everything else. She got up, eventually washed her face, laid out the clothes she'd wear tomorrow, organized her documents one final time, and went to bed. She slept. For the first time in 3 years, fully and without waking, she slept. She was awake before the alarm. Not because she was anxious, she had moved past anxious somewhere in the night, and come out the other side into something steadier, and colder, and more useful. She dressed without hurrying, pinned her hair, picked up the document folder she'd prepared the night before, and went downstairs. Ethan was already in the kitchen. He had coffee made and 2 cups on the table, and the look of a man who hadn't slept much, but wasn't going to mention it. She sat down without a word. He pushed a cup toward her without a word. They drank in the early morning quiet, and neither of them said anything about the night before, because everything that had been said was still sitting exactly where they'd left it, and didn't need to be moved yet. Judge Harlan will meet us at the hall at 8, Ethan said finally. Good, Tom. He'll be there with the hands, 6 of them. He paused. Not to make a scene, just to be present. Good, she said again. Maggie Williams. She sent word this morning. She and her 7 will be seated before the board arrives. Lily set down her cup. 7 became 8 overnight, she said. Margaret Finley sent a note. She's coming. Something moved through his expression. She and Daniel both. Both. She folded her hands on the table. Ethan, I want to say something before we go in. He waited. Whatever happens in that room today, however it goes, I need you to let Judge Harlan lead. Don't speak unless Harlan signals you to. Don't react to what Greer says about me. She held his gaze directly. I mean it. If he says something ugly about my past, about Robert's debts, about any of it, you stay still. The best thing you can do for me in that room is be unshakable. Can you do that? He looked at her steadily. I can do that. Because if you react, it looks like guilt. If you stay still, it looks like the truth. I understand, he said. She nodded. She picked up the document folder and stood. Then let's go end this. The county hall was already half full when they arrived. Lily walked in beside Ethan and felt the room's attention shift toward them like a physical thing, a change in pressure, a collective intake of breath. She didn't slow her stride. She didn't look at the gallery. She walked to the front table where Judge Warren Harlan was already seated, arranging documents with the methodical precision of a man who had spent 50 years in rooms exactly like this one and was not remotely impressed by any of them. He was smaller than she'd expected from his reputation. Thin, white-haired, with a face like weathered oak, and eyes behind his spectacles that were about 20 years younger than the rest of him. He looked up when they sat down. He looked at Lily first. "Mrs. Spencer," he said, "you have all the documentation." "Everything," she said. She set the folder in front of him. He opened it, scanned the first 3 pages with the speed of a man reading something he'd already read, and nodded once. "Good. Don't speak unless I indicate. Not to Greer, not to the board, not to anyone in the gallery." He looked at Ethan. "Same for you." "Understood," Ethan said. Harlan glanced toward the gallery. Lily followed his look. Maggie Williams was seated in the second row with 7 women arranged around her like a small, formidable battalion. Clara Whitlock was among them. Margaret Finley was at the end of the row, her husband Daniel beside her, his hands clasped on his knees and his jaw set with the particular tension of a man who has decided to be braver than he feels. Lily caught Margaret's eye. Margaret gave her one small, firm nod. Lily turned back to the front table. Nathan Greer entered 2 minutes later. He came in with his attorney and 2 men from his office, and the comfortable confidence of a man who had never lost anything he'd decided to take. He sat at the opposing table and didn't look at Lily at all, which told her everything about how he planned to run his argument. She was going to be treated as if she weren't there, as if she were furniture, as if the case were only about Ethan and she were merely the pretext. She folded her hands on the table and waited. The board took their seats. Chairman Ellis, a thin-faced man with careful eyes, who Lily had been watching for the past 2 weeks, called the hearing to order. He ran through the formal language with the speed of someone who wanted this finished, which could mean anything. Greer's attorney went first. He was smooth, the kind of smooth that came from practice and a lack of conscience working together efficiently. He presented the amended transfer record. He presented a signed statement from a county clerk attesting to its authenticity. He built the case slowly and confidently. Financial irregularity, household mismanagement, questionable judgment in personnel decisions. A land grant holder whose compromised domestic arrangements called into question his fitness to manage county-registered property. He never once used Lily's name. He said the individual currently employed and the woman in question, and once with a particular precision that made the air in the room go sharp. The widow of a man whose own financial failures were a matter of public record. Ethan didn't move. Lily didn't move either. She pressed her hands flat against the table under the edge of the document folder and breathed evenly and let the words go past her the way she had learned to let things go past her. Then Harlan stood up. The room changed. It was remarkable how completely a room could change when the right person stood up in it. Board member Greer, Nathan's uncle, third seat from the left, visibly shifted in his chair. Chairman Ellis straightened. Harlan didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. "Gentlemen," he said, "I appreciate the thorough presentation. We will now examine the documentation on which it rests." He set the original invoice on the table. He set the bank's certified original transfer receipt beside it. He set Elias Pruitt's signed statement on top of both. "Mr. Chairman, the document presented by opposing counsel as evidence of financial irregularity does not match the bank's original processing record. Here is that record certified this week by the bank manager himself. The discrepancy is not the result of mismanagement. It is the result of deliberate alteration." He paused. The initials on the altered record belonged to a clerk employed by Nathan Greer's county office. The gallery went audible. Ellis hit his gavel once. "Order." Greer's attorney was on his feet. "The initials are inconclusive." "They are documented," Harlan said pleasantly. "As is the testimony of Daniel Pruitt, who will confirm that Mr. Greer personally requested his cooperation in validating the altered record and who declined." He turned slightly toward the gallery. "Mr. Pruitt?" Daniel Pruitt stood up from his seat beside Margaret. His face was white. His voice when he spoke was not loud, but it was absolutely clear. "Nathan Greer came to my home on the 14th of July, he said. He asked me to confirm the altered transfer record is accurate. He told me that if I refused, he would arrange for the bank's spring examination report to be reviewed by the county auditor." He stopped, swallowed. I refused. I have provided a written account to Judge Harlan. Every word is true. He sat down. Margaret took his hand. The room was completely silent for 3 full seconds. Then it wasn't. Greer's attorney called for a recess. Ellis denied it. Greer himself for the first time said something directly to his attorney in a voice too low to carry, and his attorney looked like a man who had just discovered the floor was considerably less solid than advertised. It was Harlan who put down the final document. The survey record from Wichita. He set it in front of Chairman Ellis personally, which was a deliberate choice bypassing the opposing table entirely. The original land grant survey, Harlan said, filed with the Federal Land Office in 1863, 11 years prior to any adjacent filing by the Greer family. He looked at Ellis calmly. The eastern boundary is not disputed. It has never been disputed. What has been disputed for 15 years is this family's willingness to sell land they are not obligated to sell. He stepped back. The board may take whatever time it needs. The documentation is complete. He sat down. Lily became aware that her hands, still pressed flat to the table, were no longer shaking. At some point in the last 10 minutes they had stopped and she hadn't noticed. She looked sideways at Ethan. He was watching the board with an expression that gave nothing away. But under the table where no one could see his hand found hers. Not a gesture, not a statement. Just a hand finding another hand in a moment that needed it. She didn't move away. The board took 20 minutes. Lily didn't count the minutes. She sat in the hall while the gallery buzzed around her, and Harlan reviewed his papers, and Ethan stayed exactly as still as she'd asked him to be, and Greer sat at his table with the quality of silence of a man watching something he built falling. Maggie Williams leaned over from the second row at one point and said in a voice pitched only for Lily, "You're doing well." "I'm sitting still," Lily said. "Sometimes that's the same thing," Maggie said. When the board came back, Chairman Ellis took his seat and looked at his papers for a moment before he looked up. Lily noticed that he did not look at Nathan Greer when he began to speak. "The Carson land grant renewal is confirmed without condition," he said. "The boundary survey on record stands as filed." He paused. "Additionally, this board is referring the matter of the altered transfer document and the testimony of Daniel Pruitt to the county attorney's office for investigation. Board member Greer," he looked at Nathan's uncle directly, "is recused from all further proceedings related to this matter effective immediately." The gallery erupted. Lily heard it as if from a slight distance. She heard Maggie Williams say something short and satisfied behind her. She heard Tom Briggs's voice somewhere in the crowd saying, "That's right," with quiet conviction. She heard Nathan Greer push his chair back. She watched Greer stand. He was still doing the calculation. She could see it in his face, the furious arithmetic of a man determining what was still salvageable. He looked at the board. He looked at Harlan. And then, for the first time, he looked at Lily. She held his gaze without expression. He looked away first. He picked up his hat and walked out. The room filled with sound. Harlan leaned over to Lily and said in a perfectly conversational voice, "The county attorney will want your documentation copies. I'd give him the originals and keep certified copies for yourselves." "Already prepared," she said. She handed him the second envelope she'd packed the night before. He looked at it. He looked at her. "You prepared for this outcome before the hearing." "I prepared for both outcomes," she said. "But yes." He made a sound that on a different man's face might have been a laugh. "Ethan," he said, "I suggest you not let this woman go anywhere." Ethan looked at Lily. "I don't intend to," he said. Dad. Outside was different from inside. Inside had been contained pressurized a closed system with fixed rules. Outside in the July heat, with the town spreading around them and people streaming out of the hall, everything was louder and less organized and more real. Tom Briggs shook Ethan's hand for a long time without saying anything, which was how Tom expressed the things that mattered most. The ranch hands clustered nearby, grinning. Margaret Finley appeared at Lily's elbow and held out her hand again the same way she had on the chapel steps, and Lily shook it the same way firmly with full knowledge of what it cost and what it meant. "Daniel," Lily said to the man standing a careful step behind his wife. He looked at her. He looked like a man who had just discovered what he was made of and wasn't entirely sure what to do with the information. "You did a brave thing today," she said. "I did the right thing," he said. "Took me a while to get there." He said it without self-pity, just as a fact he was living with. "It counted," she said. "It counted for everything." He nodded. He didn't trust himself to say more. Margaret squeezed Lily's arm once, as they moved through the crowd, and Lily let her, which was its own kind of arrival. Maggie Williams found her 10 minutes later. The old woman came through the crowd with her cane and her bright, ancient eyes and stopped in front of Lily with the expression of someone who has lived long enough to enjoy being right. "Well," Maggie said. "Well," Lily agreed. "The county attorney will have Greer's clerk in an office by Monday," Maggie said. "And I'd give Nathan Greer himself 6 weeks before he decides his business interests are better served somewhere other than Caldwell County." She said it with complete serenity. "Bullies always go where it's easier. When you take the easy away from them, they move on." "Thank you for coming," Lily said. "Thank you for giving us something worth coming to." Maggie looked past her toward Ethan, who was speaking with Harlan a few feet away. "He's a good man," she said, not as an opinion, but as a verdict. "He just needed someone to stand next to him who wasn't afraid of the town." She looked back at Lily. "And you needed a town that would eventually stop being afraid of itself." She put one small hand briefly on Lily's arm. "I think you've both got what you needed." She moved away through the crowd, people parting for her without being asked the way they always had. They rode back to the ranch in the quiet of late morning, just the two of them. The July heat settling over the county road and the sound of the horses, and nothing else. Lily held the document folder in her lap and watched the land and didn't reach for conversation, and Ethan didn't either. It was only when the ranch gate came into view that he slowed the horses and stopped. She looked at him. "Now," he said quietly, "if you're willing." She set the document folder on the seat between them. "Now," she agreed. He turned toward her. He was a man who chose his words the way he chose everything deliberately after thought, with the full weight of what he meant behind them. "I told you weeks ago that I'd lost things that mattered because I chose reputation over what was right," he said. "I told you I didn't intend to do that again." He paused. "What I didn't tell you because I didn't have the right to yet was that what's right for me is you." His voice was steady and plain and completely without performance. "Not because you found the discrepancy in my ledgers. Not because you walked into that hall today and held the whole thing together. Because you showed up in my stable before daylight and scrubbed the floor and looked me in the eye and didn't ask me for a single thing you hadn't earned." He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her for weeks. The open, unguarded way, except this time he didn't pull it back. "I have been alone in this house for 4 years, and I didn't know what was missing until I watched you drink your coffee standing at my kitchen table and refused to sit down until you were ready." Lily's throat was tight. She kept her eyes on his face. "I'm not asking you to decide anything today," he said. "The hearing is done, and you're free to if you wanted to take another position, or—" He stopped himself. "That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is—" He exhaled once. "Lily, I love you. That's what I'm saying. Everything else is a question, and I'm asking it without a time limit." The July heat sat around them, and the horses stood still, and somewhere on the ranch, a gate swung on its hinges in the breeze and clanged once softly. She had told herself she would be careful. She had told herself that love was a thing she needed to examine from a distance before she walked toward it again. She had told herself a great many things in the 3 years since the world had taken everything from her and left her on her knees on a stable floor. She looked at Ethan Carson and understood that careful was something she had already left behind somewhere in the last 8 weeks without noticing the exact moment it happened. She had been walking toward this without admitting she was walking. "I know what you're saying," she said. Her voice was steady. "And I need you to understand something." She held his gaze. "I am not a woman who settles. I am not a woman who accepts what's offered out of gratitude or convenience." She paused. "If I say yes to anything, it's because I mean it all the way down. Not because you saved me from something. Not because you gave me a room and a salary when I needed them." She let him sit with that for a moment. "Do you understand the difference?" "Yes," he said. "I do." "Good." She looked at him for one long final moment of choosing. "Then yes," she said. "To the question. To all of it. Yes." He was quiet for a moment, the way he was always quiet when something mattered enough to need the silence. Then he reached over and took her hand. Not urgently, not desperately, but with the same careful, complete certainty he brought to everything that was real. "Thank you," he said so quietly, it was almost only breath. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just don't make me regret it." The corner of his mouth moved. "No, ma'am," he said. "I don't intend to." She let him keep her hand as he set the horses moving again, toward the gate, toward the ranch, toward the house that she had spent 8 weeks making into a home without quite realizing that was what she was doing. They were married 6 weeks later in the small chapel on the south side of town, the quiet one, the one attended by ranch families and working people. Maggie Williams sat in the front row like she had personally arranged the whole thing, which Lily suspected she had. Tom Briggs cried, which he denied afterward, and which everyone present agreed never to mention. Margaret Finley sat 3 rows back with her husband and looked like a woman who had made peace with something and found it lighter than expected. Nathan Greer had by that point quietly begun transferring his business interests to Wichita. The county attorney's investigation into the altered transfer record had produced 2 signed confessions and 1 very uncomfortable public record, and Caldwell County had discovered what Maggie Williams had always known, that a bully with no cover is just a man with bad intentions and no power to back them up. The church was not full of unanimous approval. There were people in that county who never changed their minds about Lily Spencer, who never forgave her for Robert's debts, or her time in the Carson house, or the fact that she had stood in a county hearing and refused to be diminished. She knew this. She accepted it the way she accepted weather, not with bitterness, but with the clear-eyed recognition that some things were outside her control and therefore not worth her energy. What she had was enough. More than enough. More than she had allowed herself to want for 3 long years. She had a house that was a home. She had work that used every part of her mind. She had a man who listened when she spoke and asked her opinion on his accounts, and had once on a very cold July morning handed her his financial records and said, "Fix them," with the absolute confidence of someone who knew she could. She had a town that was slowly, imperfectly, unevenly learning that the stories it told about women like Lily Spencer said less about the women than about the town. And she had the memory of a stable floor before dawn, and a man's boots stopping behind her, and a voice that had said, "You don't have to do this," and the absolute certainty standing in the July heat with her cracked hands and her unbent spine that she was going to be all right. She had known it then. She knew it now. Lily Spencer had come into Ethan Carson's stable with nothing but her work and her pride, and the refusal to let 3 years of loss define the rest of her life. She had finished what she started, and that had turned out to be everything.